Okay, before we get into this today, and yes I am ill if you can hear it in my voice, I did a full section here, recorded it, did all my gameplay and everything for a PvP section, and I've decided to just cut it and forgo getting ads on a 10-minute video because it just wasn't worth it. What we'll do in place is you ask me right now, is Breakneck worth using in PvP? And I will say, no. There's just too many things that have an advantage over it to a large degree. So no, I personally do not see Breakneck as a PvP weapon. Something it does comfortably seem to get beaten by now is the buffed Hardlight, and that's a nice little segue into my second point. In this video, I make the assertion that it's just an auto rifle, and I make it sound like they're all bad. I just want to say that the previous video I did on the Steel Feather Repeater God Roll, and also Hardlight now, both are really great auto rifles. So they're not all bad, but in general, we know auto rifles aren't great, and that is a criticism that can be leveled at Breakneck as well some of the time. Alright, let's get on with this. Alright, ladies and gents, welcome back to some Destiny 2, and today we're talking about Breakneck, the Gambit pinnacle weapon from some time back. Why a video now on this weapon, you might ask? Well, it got a buff, and a fairly substantial one actually. So we're going to explore if it's now worth a spot in your loadout, at least for certain activities, because before, well, it didn't exactly function in the manner that you would logically expect, which resulted in it being a bit of a letdown considering the slaying power that it looked like it would have from the description of its perks. So what are those perks? Well, in case you've forgotten, the two key ones are Rampage and Onslaught. Rampage functions exactly as it does on all weapons. You get a kill, your damage increases for a brief period of time, and this can stack up to 3 times. And then Onslaught increases your rate of fire as you gain stacks of Rampage. That's the unique perk on Breakneck. So of course this sounds like it should be damn near a weapon of mass destruction in the right circumstances. But previously, your damage per bullet actually went down as you continued to stack Rampage. So for example, going from 1 stack of Rampage to 2 stacks of Rampage actually dropped your bullet damage, which seems counterintuitive, but not anymore, that's no longer the case. Bungie have tweaked those damage values, so whereas before your damage per second with Breakneck was 2,170 at 1 stack of Rampage, and 2,120 at 2 stacks of Rampage, well now after the buff, it'll be 2,190 at 1 stack of Rampage, so higher than before, and 2,410 at 2 stacks of Rampage. So yes, your DPS now does actually increase thankfully, and by a decent chunk as well, basically equating to Breakneck being more lethal now and therefore a more viable and worthwhile option. And so with Rampage and Onslaught being the key combination behind what makes Breakneck tick, what mod do I recommend you run? Well, I don't personally find the weapon particularly hard to handle, even here on console, so for me that puts counterbalance stock and targeting adjuster out of the picture, which opens things up a bit. My top 2 picks would be either backup mag, so you can make further use of your stacks of Rampage before reloading, or Rampage Spec, to extend the duration of Rampage by a little, increasing your ability to keep your stacks going. Me personally, I currently use Rampage Spec rather than backup mag, but I can see either being a good choice as long as Bungie's coding actually allows Rampage Spec to function on Breakneck, considering it has Onslaught paired with it, and sometimes these things cause weird issues. But as long as that's not the case, then it's all fine. Maybe some people will prefer backup mag in PvE, as it's easier to keep your Rampage stacks anyway, and then Rampage Spec if you want to use it in PvP to give you that bit longer to find the next target. As ever though, the choice is yours for which mod you want to use. Now, I already had 7,500 kills with Breakneck before the buff, basically because when I came back to the game after taking a year out due to making solely Battlefield content at that time, I was slow to getting around to picking up Recluse. I just had so much to catch up on, which shows that I did enjoy Breakneck and found it useful even before the buff. But then when I got Recluse, well, Breakneck went into the vault. But with Recluse now having been nerfed so that headshots are now needed for optimal performance, is Breakneck worth it? Because as Recluse's effectiveness basically goes down, Breakneck's is going up. Well, let's make it clear that Recluse is still a very good weapon. It's not dead at all, and personally I still prefer Recluse, even if there are now some guns with possible roles that could be seen as superseding Recluse. Its damage buff perk, Master of Arms, is very easy to proc, and gaining kills grants you Feeding Frenzy for faster reloads as well. Breakneck requires a bit more work in order to achieve its optimal time to kill, in fact a lot more work, but it does absolutely destroy once it's at rampage times 2 or 3. But the key thing for me is it's lacking elemental damage because it's a kinetic weapon. So fighting against shields is a pain as it's a rampage killer, whereas something like Recluse doesn't have to worry about that. In fact, it shreds shields as long as match game isn't active. And the reason this is more relevant on Breakneck is because when you don't have the perks active, it's just a 450 RPM assault rifle, and as most of you will know, they're not that effective, to be honest. And all of that comparison basically works as well for any well-rolled elemental SMG, or indeed, arguably, even more so at this point, elemental sidearm. The absolute god roll Last Hope with Feeding Frenzy and multi-kill clip is going to be better than Breakneck for the vast majority of players. But getting that roll is a miracle, really. So what about something a bit more likely? Well, how about a lot more likely? Breachlight is a sidearm from the Sundial, something you can actually farm for 4 rewards at a time, so super farmable for a god roll. Plus it's also a kinetic weapon for an even more direct comparison to Breakneck. Well, it can roll with multi-kill clip and outlaw, and for my money again, my personal opinion, it's just better than Breakneck. But it could be argued that it's easier to stack Rampage and therefore utilize Onslaught on Breakneck than it is to stack up multi-kill clip on other weapons. So that's open to personal preference, although I think something with Swashbuckler is just straight up better due to a melee giving you full Swashbuckler stacks. Either way though, this doesn't mean Breakneck isn't good, because although it basically can't fight mages or heavily shielded enemies effectively, and therefore goes back to just being a mediocre assault rifle when that happens, it is still fantastic for low level ad clearing. If you want to run through a basic strike or play some gambit, then Breakneck is great. Just use your other weaponry to deal with shields and high health bar enemies, and then down those weak ads with Breakneck. It also has ease of use on its side, as it's a spray and pray weapon, whereas sidearms, for example, require that little bit more precision, and SMGs are often that little bit harder to handle. And I guess the important point is, as far as auto rifles go, this is a really good one. Now, auto rifles aren't exactly the most effective or popular weapons knocking around, but Breakneck is still absolutely one of the better ones for that weapon type. It was literally designed for the role of crushing ads, and it really only fell out of favor due to its damage dealing issues. Now that that's been fixed, well, it basically does what you'd expect. And it's fun to do that too, encouraging a fast-paced playstyle and totaling up lots of kills. And say auto rifles in general end up being a meta pick one day due to patches, well then Breakneck will be a big contender at that point, I imagine. And if we compare Breakneck with other 450 RPM auto rifles like say Braytech Werewolf, well, Breakneck allows you to kill faster much more frequently and in the vast majority of circumstances, due to that increased rate of fire with kills, summing up why it's a very strong option where auto rifles are concerned. But versus a higher rate of fire auto like Steel Feather Repeater with a fantastic roll like Feeding Frenzy and Swashbuckler, for example, well then that would be a much closer fight. So if you use Breakneck, what do you lose out on using? Well, PvE wise, it stops you from using common big hitters slash popular choices like Izanagi's Burden, Randy's Throwing Knife, and Mountaintop. It's also in the same slot as another Gambit Pinnacle or Ritual Reward, I believe, X6 Strategy, which probably deserves a lot more attention than it currently gets, by the way. But perhaps the more important aspect for many is what it does allow you to use still. Most players often have their major or shield killing option in the energy or heavy slot, and so your choice there is still totally open, as is your option of using an exotic, as Breakneck is just a legendary. And so in summary, my overall opinion is that no top tier endgame high difficulty loadout will likely really include Breakneck, at least not very often. Not because it's bad, it's actually pretty good in a lot of ways, it's just that it's still an auto rifle, even if it's a really good one. It's just not an absolute top tier pick. But barely anything in the game really is, so don't let that stop you from trying it out again, especially in something like Gambit, because it really can slay. It's pretty much made for Gambit, and it's far better than it was before the buff. It is now worthwhile, and I suggest you try it again. If you have it, it just might surprise you. And so that's my coverage for today. Let me know what you think of Breakneck now, and maybe what you thought of it before the buff. If you don't have it, maybe go and grab it, and as always, hitting that like button is appreciated. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more, and the links to my stream, Twitter, Facebook, and all of that is in the description and pinned comment. Here's to Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes, and I love them all deeply and, of course, often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy, and I'll see you next time. Laters. Auto rifles haven't had much of a relevant spot within the Destiny 2 meta for quite some time, whether it be PvP or PvE. Personally, I throw one on now and again to do whatever I'm doing in the game, and I just end up feeling a bit let down. But not here. Why is that? Well, two things: Feeding Frenzy and Swashbuckler. It's a hell of a combo.